Start your habit of continuous learning today. Visit nomadphp.com. Welcome to Nomad PHP Lightning Talks. Lightning Talks are a 10 to 15 minute deep dive into one specific topic. If you'd like to do a lightning talk, please email joe@nomadphp.com. He would love to talk to you about doing one. Tonight, our special guest is my friend Jonathan Wage. Jonathan used to be part of the Doctrine Project. I don't know if you still are officially anymore, but he was one of the drivers behind the Doctrine Project, and he's developed this new thing called PHPChunkit. And when I saw him tweeting about it, I said that is one of the coolest things I've ever seen, and I hate unit testing, and this is still cool. So without any further ado, Jonathan, let me make you the presenter.
Awesome. Thanks, Cal. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about a library I wrote called PHPChunkit. This was born at the Open Sky project, where I work on an e-commerce platform, and I've been there for about 6 years. I'm currently the CTO of the OpenSky.com marketplace, and I run the Open Sky Nashville office. Live in Nashville, Tennessee, and like Cal mentioned, I used to contribute to Doctrine and Symphony. So the project was born out of a need to get quick feedback from developers' pull requests. When they submit, something up, they want to be able to get feedback within, 2 or 3 minutes. Ideally, it would be 0, but 2 or 3 minutes will have to do. So as our test suite has grown, we have a lot of functional coverage. I think we have about 800 functional tests, and these are tests that are actually spinning up the application and actually executing requests and evaluating the response. So we have almost 800 of those. So our test suite, when ran serially, would take about 30 minutes to run. So the idea for PHPChunkit was to write a library that would basically look at all of the tests in our project and analyze them and group them into chunks. And then once you have reproducible chunks, it's possible to actually run the chunks in parallel across multiple processes on one server in one parent PHP thread, or even across different servers. So imagine you have a Jenkins cluster, you could then run those across multiple servers and get fast deploy times. So here's an example. So I just did a really, really simple example just for demonstrative purposes. So we have this example test case with 4 tests in it, and I sleep for 1 second in each test. So imagine I had 8 of these tests, and they're all grouped as functional. So in theory, it would take 32 seconds to run that when you run it in serial mode. So that screenshot down there at the bottom left is basically that. It's just running it with 1 chunk, no parallelization, just straight up serially. So you see that it takes 32 seconds. So if we take that same example and split the test into 2 even chunks, so basically around 16 tests per chunk, and then run those chunks in parallel, you'll get twice as fast results, so 16 seconds here. So here's basically the next example. It's in a real world scenario where you're actually having real functional tests, running it on the same server just won't work. I mean, if you have databases on that same server, you're going to be competing with resources like crazy. So, I mean, of course, you can add more CPUs and memory, but you can only do that for so long. So you can basically do that same example as before, but instead of running both chunks all at once in parallel, you can basically just say, I want to chunk the test into 2, and then with the -- chunk option, you can say just run this chunk. So the idea is, if you have a deploy process where it would set up your test servers, 2 separate test servers with the same branch from GitHub, and basically do all the preparation to set up the test, and then run each chunk in parallel across those servers with Jenkins, and then aggregate the results back. So here's the second chunk, and notice how both of those have 16 assertions, and each one takes 16 seconds. So to give you a little detail on how you actually configure PHPChunkit for your application, there are some other features. You can configure it to watch your code and your tests, and whenever you modify them, it'll automatically run your tests. Point at where the tests are located, the location of PHPUnit, all the different database names that you want to connect to in your functional tests. And I'll show you a little bit more in the next few slides about how you actually accomplish setting up the Sandbox databases so you can actually run these functional tests in parallel on the same server without the databases the different tests stomping on the same database. So you can also configure a PHPChunkit with XML, basically the same parameters that you can do with PHP. So I talked a little bit about database sandboxing. So this was important for OpenSky because we were actually testing the real application, clicking product pages, adding to cart, checking out. And we were doing this with the Symfony test framework. So it wasn't going through the real browser, but it was executing full end-to-end requests. So the size of that suite grew over the last 6 years, and it went from taking 10 minutes 5 years ago to about 30 minutes about two years ago. So what we did is started to implement this library internally, and it was originally just a part of the OpenSky code base. And what we needed to do was to basically generate unique database names for each chunk that we want to run in parallel on the same server, and create the database basically for that unique database name. And we have a setup process to create the schema and everything that's required in order to run the functional tests. And then after you're done running the test, you want to have a process that cleans up the Sandbox database. So once we had those three things, it was possible then to deploy the application to dozens of different servers and run those tests in parallel across those servers with unique database names. So to implement your own Sandbox preparation and database creation and cleanup, you can just implement it in PHP, implementing the listener interface, and then you can write your own custom code here to basically in most cases, in the OpenSky case, we modify our Symfony configuration files. We have one databases.yml that basically just defines some parameter names of the names of the different databases that the application relies on. So we basically just read in that YAML file, generate some unique database names, basically just appending a unique ID to the end of the database name, and then write that YAML back to the disk. And then all the commands that we use to initialize the databases like normal will create the database for that Sandbox database name. So same thing for the database creation. You basically are just going to implement the same listener. Same thing for the Sandbox cleanup. So PHPChunkit doesn't really do that work for you because every application is so different. That was the only real way I could think to actually make this library work in a general purpose way. So I talked a little bit about the Sandbox database names. This was something that was generic enough. I mean, you basically just configure the names of the databases that you normally connect to, the names of the database that you connect to. And so like in the Symfony example, we have a config directory, a databases.yml. We have a databases test_test.yml. And we connect to a different test database basically with _test appended to the end. So when we run our Sandbox prepare process, we basically just read that in and then use the configuration object to get the database Sandbox object and get the Sandbox database names, which get generated dynamically. You have a unique name per database, and then you can modify your config file using that data. So that's basically it. Those are all the concepts that make up PHPChunkit. It's a pretty early project. It works, in the OpenSky project specifically pretty well. So I think there are a lot of different ways people use PHPUnit. So I'm really interested to see people give it a try on their project so I can make it more flexible and work with the different types of PHP projects out there.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. If you'd like to give a Nomad PHP lightning talk, we'd love to hear from you. Email joe at nomadphp.com. And to see our entire collection, visit our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/nomadphp. All the lightning talks that we have ever recorded are all released there for your viewing.